Thank you, John and Peter, for that introduction. Just to double check, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Everybody hear me okay?
Paul, you need to unmute yourself.
All right, yeah.
Sorry, there you go.
That's a clear false error. I don't know quite how I muted myself then, because you all heard me when I said, could you hear me?
But then I muted everybody.
Oh, then you muted everybody. I had
Yes.
to unmute myself.
Yes,
that
yes.
explains it, because I didn't touch anything. Just to say that, just to correct Peter, I wasn't scheduled for later on in the year. I was scheduled for last year, and so this has been, and I was actually booked the year before. So this has been in planned now for 2 years. So I've had plenty of time to prepare this presentation. The reality is that I've spent the last week. I did one last year in preparation for last year, and then I kind of put it on the shelf, and then I pulled it up again about a week ago. So I've been working on this though on and off though for over 12 months. Could I first of all thank you as a group for inviting me to speak, and particularly to Anne for sending me the invitation, and to John for the techie stuff for tonight, helping out. But I'd like to pay a special thanks to Robert Vaughan, who's the one who set me up for this. I'm not quite sure whether, I hope you enjoy it, but if there's anyone to blame, it's Robert. He's the one on an ongoing basis should blame for anything that goes wrong. And I hope you enjoy what I say. There will undoubtedly be some technical issues, I suspect. There always is with Zoom. So please forgive me in advance. Before well, I'm going to share my screen now. So hopefully it will work. Can everyone see that? Yeah, excellent. I'm now going to, before I jump into the presentation, I'd just like to start off with a little bit of a bang by playing you some music by Billy Bragg. Does anyone heard of Billy Bragg? I can see thumbs going up. So this will hopefully start us off with a little bit of a bang. It's called The World Turned Upside Down, and it lasts about a couple of minutes unless I decide to cut it a bit short. And I just hope this is where whether the technology works. Can everyone hear me? Hear the music?
In 1649 to St George's Hill, a ragged band they called the Diggers came to show the people's will. They defied the landlords, they defied the laws. They were the dispossessed, reclaiming what was theirs. We come in peace, they said, to dig and sow. We come to work the lands in common and to make the waste grounds grow. This earth divided, we will make whole. So it will be a common treasury for all. The sin of property we do disdain. No man has any right to buy and sell the earth for private gain. By theft and murder they took the land. Now everywhere the walls spring up at their command. They make the laws to chain us well. The clergy dazzle us with heaven, or they damn us into hell. We will not worship the God they serve, the God of greed who feeds the rich while poor men starve. We work, we eat together, we need no swords. We will not bow to the masters or pay rent to the lords. We are free men, though we are poor. You diggers all stand up for glory, stand up now.
That was Billy Bragg. I cut it short because there's going to be another version of this which I'm going to play later on, but I think it sets the scene. The diggers and the digger movement, and I'll cover this in more detail later, has had profound effects on on the world in a variety of different ways, and certainly just in terms of music, there's a whole range of people who've written songs about, played music about the Diggers, and therefore this presentation is set within this context that the history still continues in essence. What I'd like to do, this is the outline of the presentation. I'm not going to go through it. You could see it there. But the early indicators, I mean, let me go on to the next stage. The early indicators of the well before the Diggers appeared on the scene, these are the sort of things that needed to happen historically before the Diggers and the English Civil War and the English Revolution could take place. The first one is that the printing of the Bible and the access to the Bible, but for ordinary people, had to be there. People's lives were essentially, and the world was understood essentially through biblical tradition, by the time of before and up to the time of the 17th century. But for the first time, ordinary people had access to reading the Bible. They weren't dependent upon the priests or people who could read and write to interpret the Bible for them. Shakespeare and the rise of popular music and drama that was accessed by ordinary people had to occur in order for the English Revolution and the Digger movement to arise. There also had to be the rise in industrial and mercantile capitalism had to slowly emerge, and this was really important again for the rise of because the forces which led to the English Revolution had to emerge slowly during earlier periods. And more importantly, there had to be a culture which was starting to encourage new ideas, debates, and challenges to the status quo. And that was taking the form of religion, in the realm of religion and in politics in particular. Now, you can't, you can't understand again what was happening around and the rise of the Digger movement without thinking about and understanding the Civil War. And this screen, I've depicted the English Civil War. It ran from 1642 to 1651. It's essentially been viewed as a battle between Cavaliers and Roundheads, between people like me, bald head, Roundheads, and people like Robert Vaughan, who looks like a Cavalier. So that's the way it's often been presented. I would like to suggest that things were a little bit more complicated than that. The bottom picture also depicts an important element of what happened during this period. And for the first time in English history, and indeed, it could be argued wider afield, the reigning monarch's head was chopped off. Now, we may look back at that time and think, well, that's unusual. That's strange, but for those times it might have been more common. This was actually a significant act that the reigning monarch, who up until this time had been perceived as God's representative on earth, claiming religious power, had his head chopped off. So this was quite a significant feature. I mean, the English Civil War ran from 1642 to 1651, and Charles I had his head chopped off in 1649, and so 1649 is a significant year, both for the Diggers and for the fact that the king lost his head. This is also a period when the Church of England was having its almost monopoly on Christian and religious thought in England and Wales and in Scotland and Ireland was suddenly being challenged, and the monopoly was effectively ended with the beheading of the king. But the English Civil War, presented as Roundheads and Cavaliers, was merely part of what was happening at this time. I would describe it, and I have described it here, as the English Revolution. So it was something different from the Civil War, and the Revolution was ushered in, went way beyond the simple political machinations and supporters of royalists versus Parliament. It also ushered in a new period of social and economic change and battles over ideas, which I've referred to earlier, about what kind of society might arise out of the Civil War. Also, the Civil War created the conditions for, in a sense, uprisings of people. People started to, they were frightened as much as anything else. The Civil War had created a situation in which harvests were failing. It was also a period in which there were severe winters at this time. So not only was the Civil War affecting food production and distribution, but also the winters was affecting food distribution. And businesses were collapsing. Small businesses, the mercantile classes were suffering very badly, as well as ordinary people who were starving. The picture on the bottom left-hand side of the picture is from the film Winstanley, which I'll refer to in a little bit more detail later, but depicts the kind of conditions of ordinary people, and also the top right-hand picture depicts that people were in appalling situations in and around 1649. The central picture here is from what was happening at a kind of a political level, where there was a kind of revolt from below to effectively when Oliver Cromwell took over, he ushered in an era in which, or period of time in which there was debates about the nature of the political settlement which would occur following the beheading of the king, and there was it was following on from the battle between the royalists, the king, and Parliament. But it went further. A group emerged within the New Model Army of Cromwell's New Model Army, but also wider afield, called the Levellers, who were saying and fighting fought for what we would now see as universal suffrage, although it was only for men. The question of whether women should vote never really arose during this period, but it was at the start of a process about Parliament being elected by people rather than resting in the hands of just simply the powerful or the church or within royalists. This was also a period. It's a bit like today in some ways. I mean, today, as a result of the pandemic, but probably it was happening a bit before as well. But conspiracy theories, people are running rampant as people are very fearful about the pandemic. But at this time, I mean, things were so bad that all kinds of ideas were emerging, new ideas about how society should function. New religious movements, the Baptists, Anabaptists, the Quakers, or the origins of the Quakers can be traced back to this period. And there's a really interesting, a very, very interesting movement called the Ranters. Now, this is a bit of a diversion, but I particularly for those of you who are familiar with this period, they're a particularly interesting group, and you could see from these these pictures. There's the one on the left, depicting couples kissing and talking about increasing and multiplying. They were very much into kind of sexual freedoms and talking openly about sex. The center picture shows them dancing and drinking and having a good time. And the ranters said that basically whatever human beings do and like to do and enjoy doing is a religious is a religious activity, and this would be endorsed by God. And the picture on the far left, on the right, sorry, if you look at it carefully, it's actually quite naughty, with people dancing in the nude and people eating and drinking, etc. And the ranters got quite a following at one level. They were the both the hippies and the anarchists and the free love 1960s kind of movements of the 17th century. And I have a little song here that I want to play for you by it's called Ebenezer Cop, and it's written and sang by Leon Rosselson, who some of you will know. And Ebenezer Cop is allegedly from Bedford. So it's a good possibility that this particular ranter came to Northamptonshire, because they travelled around, did the ranters, to all kinds of places, singing and dancing and generally living it up. So I'm going to play you this short, it's a 5-minute rendition of Ebenezer Cop. I'm not going to play that for the whole 5 minutes, if it works.
Ebenezer Cop did away with sin. My body is my church, he said, God's dwelling is within. All I do is holy, Ebenezer cried, gave his loving freely, a ranter till he died. So drink a loving cup to Ebenezer, Ebenezer, he's a drinking, dancing, roaring ranter. Ebenezer Cop, Ebenezer Cop. A pox upon the pious and on what the scriptures teach. I'd sooner hear a tinker curse than hear a vicar preach. Shameless in his pleasures, drank and smoked and swore, embracing as his fellow creatures beggar, thief and whore. So drink a loving cup to Ebenezer, Ebenezer, he's a drinking, dancing, roaring ranter. Ebenezer Cop, Ebenezer Cop.
Okay, if at the end you want to hear these songs in more detail, I'm quite happy to replay these songs, but I'm going to stop that there. But it gives you a feeling of what the ranters were about, and they were one particular sect that emerged during this period. But what I'm going to start to talk about is what we might call the new levelers, and in particular, I want to talk about Gerard Winstanley. Now, Gerard Winstanley was born in 1609 in Wigan, and he was a merchant tailor in London. But then he was bankrupted, and in 1649 he moved to Cobham in Surrey, where he set up I'll say a little bit more about this in a second, but he basically set up a commune at St George's Hill near Cobham, and this was the origins of the digger movement. But Winstanley was an impressive writer. He wrote loads of tracts and articles and publications advocating his new ideas, which were informed by biblical tradition. He wrote his most famous tract is called the New Laws of Righteousness, which is there. Part of it is there on the screen. They called themselves the New Levelers to distinguish themselves from the Levelers, who were essentially a political movement, as I mentioned earlier, advocating for the franchise for men of property. In reality, that's what it was. So they were Democrats wanting to extend the vote quite to all men, but who essentially wanted to give the vote to men of property. The New Levelers, influenced by Gerard Winstanley, were quite different. They wanted economic equality, economic and were essentially about ordinary people's rights to live freely and to as it transpired to dig the land, to feed their families. And I'm going to read you a little bit from the Book of Acts, which was in the biblical tradition, which was very influential in his thinking, verses 44 and 45, which says, all who believed were together and had all things in common. They would sell their possessions and goods and distribute the proceeds to all as any had need. And Winstanley argued that in the beginning of time, God made the earth. Not one word was spoken at the beginning that one branch of mankind should rule over another, but selfish imaginations did set up one man to teach and rule over another. And his views on the killing or the beheading of the king is interesting. He said, seeing the common people of England, by joint consent of person and purse, have cast out Charles, our Norman oppressor. We have by this victory recovered ourselves from under his Norman yoke. Now, the references there are quite interesting. Charles I was seen, even in 1649, this is 600 years later, I think if my maths is correct, as the Norman oppressor, the victor at 1066. And there's a reference there to the Norman yoke. This was an appeal to a history of Saxon versus Norman, where the Normans were seen as the rich and the powerful who took over the land, while the Saxon peasantry remained oppressed. So he's referencing here a divide which goes back to 1066, which is, I find incredible that he was writing and drawing upon that kind of tradition. Okay, so we now move on to the diggers and New Levelers in a bit more detail. I'm just going to now play you another short piece. This is again by Leon Rosselson, and I will stop it. It goes on for 4 minutes normally, called "You Noble Diggers All."
You noble diggers all, stand up now, stand up now. You noble diggers all, stand up now. Your wastelands to maintain, seeing cavaliers by name. Your digging to disdain, and your persons all defame. Stand up now, diggers all. Your houses they pull down, stand up now, stand up now. Your houses they pull down, stand up now. Your houses they pull down, to fright poor men in town. But the gentry must come down, and the poor shall wear the crown. Stand up now, diggers all. With spades and hoes and ploughs. Stand up now, stand up now. With spades and hoes and ploughs, stand up now. Your freedom to uphold, seeing cavaliers of old, to kill you if they could, and the rights from you withhold. Stand up now, diggers all.
Their self-will is their law. Stand up now, stand up now. Their self-will is their law. Stand up now.
Since tyranny came in, they counted now no sin, to make a jail a gin, and to starve poor folk therein. Stand up now, diggers all.
The diggers, or new levellers as they're called, as I mentioned, were essentially the creation of Gerald Winstanley, and while he was in Cobham, when a group of people led by Winstanley occupied some land at St George's Hill and started to dig the common land. And in 1649, this was in 1649 in the early part of the year, and the council of the record of this comes from something from the Council of State, which was something that was sat as part of the political structure under Oliver Cromwell. So it was a national body, the Council of State, and they received a letter from local landowners. And to quote from it, it said they feared, this is a quote from the Council of State, they feared the diggers had some design at hand. And it's interesting, the design at hand, it's not clear what that was, but we do know that they were digging the land, and the common land. And the report went on to say that several individuals had begun to plant vegetables on the common land at St George's Hill near Cobham in Surrey. Now, that's all they were doing. The common land is available for at that time, but the common land was available for all people to go and use and to dig. And we'll come on to this a little bit when looking at the Wellingborough diggers, which I'll come to shortly. But the St George's Hill colony was quite significant because it was one of the largest and the start of the digger movement. It's not known how it was started, but it's likely to have been earlier in the year. It's early in the year 1649. They sent out people as well from the colony to other parts of the country and to the local area, and they called on people to join them and promised them meat, drink, and clothes. And they also indicated they intended to pull down all enclosures. This was a time when the enclosure movement was starting to happen, where common land was starting to be enclosed. And they were committed to fight against this, and said that they intended to pull down all enclosures and ask the local populace to come and work for them. The response, as you could imagine, was mixed. Many ordinary people, both in and around Cobham, would have, and St George's Hill, would have supported the diggers. There's little doubt in that regard. But of course, the local landowners were less supportive. Although, again, I'll come on to this when looking at the Wellingborough diggers. There's some indication that some local landowners, and indeed some quite rich people, supported the digger movement. But the local lord of the manor, who happened to be called Francis Drake, but he's not the Francis Drake that we know. That was much earlier in the Elizabethan times. He started to harass the digger colony, and he organised gangs to attack it. And the Council of State was getting quite worried that this was becoming a bit of a public order issue. So they issued an instruction to Sir Thomas Fairfax, who was the head of the New Model Army, effectively the army, Cromwell's army, and he was sent along. They turned up to interview Winstanley and other diggers. But Fairfax, interestingly, concluded that they were doing no harm and told the landowners to use the courts if they wanted action taken against the diggers. And it's quite apparent that certainly in the this early period of digger movement, there was quite a bit of support within the New Model Army and amongst the rank and file army for the digger movement. And because they were essentially the people who made up the New Model Army were essentially coming from the same social groupings as the people that were composed the diggers. They were ordinary people who were taken to digging the land to feed their families. Now, why is the Wellingborough digger slide blank? Well, except for some things which I'm going to come on to later, we actually don't know too much about them. To be real, that's why I called this the life and times of the Wellingborough diggers, because it would be very difficult to have a presentation just about the Wellingborough diggers. Although I could have done it, but I didn't try. But what we do have with something called the Wellingborough Digger Declaration. Now, this is quite a unique document. It's in the British Library now, and I'm quite happy that well, below this, at the bottom of this slide, is a link to the Digger Declaration. The words. It's very difficult to read it on the screen, but I would urge you to go and have a look at it, and I'll also post in a minute, when I can do, a link to it in the chat, because the declaration itself is incredibly moving. But just a few pointers. What it says, if I can find the declaration, here it is. Further down, can you see my mouse? Can you see my mouse? Just here, it's referenced. It says that some of those rich men amongst us that have had the greatest profit from the commons have freely given us their share in it, as one Mr. John Freeman, Thomas Nottingham, and John Clendon, and divers others, many others. And the country farmers have proffered divers of them to give us seed to sow it. So it's quite apparent from this declaration, from the primary source declaration, that some rich people, John Freeman, Thomas Nightingale, John Clendon, actually supported them and gave over their interest in the common land over to the diggers, the Wellingborough diggers. And some other, it also references farmers who gave them seed to sow. So this wasn't just the peasants that were involved in this. This was very much a movement which was supported by many others. And at the bottom of the deck, I mean, interestingly, I don't know if anyone's got any wider knowledge here. I've always wondered who John Freeman might be, and whether that could be linked in some way to Freeman's Endowed School in Wellingborough, which is a Church of England school, but was obviously established probably sometime in perhaps the 18th or 19th century by somebody called Freeman, who would have given money to establish the school. And I wonder whether that John Freeman that's referenced there might be related in some way to the Freeman that established the school. At the bottom of the declaration is the names of the people who put the Wellingborough people who put their names to the declaration, and certainly one of them, Richard Pendred, might very well be related. Pendred's quite a common name, of course, in and around Northamptonshire, but Pendred's estate agents comes to mind. Whether might be related. There's been no research, as far as I'm aware, into the people who signed the declaration. What I'd like to do now is just to go through some of the bits of the declaration. Well, first of all, I'm going to say a little bit more about the Wellingborough diggers. I think what we know about them. Well, the declaration that we've got is here. Sorry, I've missed a page in my presentation. But it doesn't matter. This is the Wellingborough Digger Declaration, some extracts from it, which I want to spend a little bit more time on. So it says, we've begun and give consent to dig up manure and sow corn upon the common and waste ground called Bear Shanks, belonging to the people of Wellingborough, by those that have subscribed and hundreds more that give consent. Okay, now Bear Shanks, for those of you who are interested, is a parcel of land that is the corner between Sywell Road that runs from Sywell towards the Mad Mile that then runs into Wellingborough. So if you're coming from Sywell towards Great Harrowden, you turn right, sorry, to go towards Wellingborough along the Mad Mile. That corner there, Sywell Road and the Mad Mile on the right-hand side, is a piece of land called Bear Shanks, and that's where the Wellingborough diggers established their colony. Now this is some of the some of the background to why they did it. We in Wellingborough, 1,169 persons that receive alms. Now that would have been, pre-Poor Law days, but they were receiving help from the public, from state authorities at that time. Our trade is decayed. Our wives and children cry for bread. Our lives are a burden to us. We cannot get bread for them by our labour. So this is a cry of the starving, and those who are really up against it. Then they make an interesting observation. Rich men's hearts are hardened. They will not give us if we beg at their doors. If we steal, the law will end our lives. Divers, many of the poor, are starved to death already, and it were better for us that are living to die by the sword than by the famine. So this is pretty serious stuff, and that's forcing them to occupy the common land and to try and set up to grow food for themselves. Now this is then also very interesting, how the biblical justification for what they're doing is very powerful. We find in the Word of God that God made the earth for the use and comfort of all mankind. And this is the influence of Winstanley coming through here, and the wider digger movement. And sat in it to dress it. God never gave to any sort of people that they should have it all to themselves and shut out the rest. We find that no creature that ever God made was deprived of the benefit of the earth but mankind. It is nothing but covetousness, pride, and hardness of heart that hath caused men so far to degenerate. And then there's the kind of the book of Revelations prophecy that in the end, the last day, the oppressor and proud man shall cease, and God will restore the waste places of the earth to the use and comfort of man, and that none shall hurt or destroy in all his holy mountain. So very powerful biblical language is used within the declaration to justify what they were doing. Now, what we do know, again, through a very short record, if I can find it in my notes. Let's move. Now this is a oops. Sorry, I've been using my mouse. So this is a photograph again from the film Winstanley, that was made in 1975, which depicts the kind, which is a kind of, the film itself, I've seen it on 2 occasions now. It's a really quite a dreary film. It's a very long film, but it really does kind of attempt to show what life would have been like at that time for this group of people. It features the St. George, not the Wellingborough diggers, this is the St. George's Hill diggers, but this is the kind of the life which people were having. Now, let me go back. Now, I've titled this slide "The End of Mischief," and there's a reason for this, because what we do know is that only a couple of months after the colony at Bearshanks was formed, it was destroyed. Because again, there's a Council of State reference. Again, landowners must have contacted the Council of State nationally to lodge complaints about what they were doing. And a letter was sent by the Council of State to a Mr. Pentlow, another good Northamptonshire name, who was Justice of the Peace for the County of Northamptonshire. And the letter said, "We approve you proceedings with the levellers in those parts, and doubt not you are sensible of the mischief these designs tend to, and of the necessity to proceed effectively against them. If the laws in force against those who intrude upon other men's properties, and that forbid and direct the punishing of all riotous assemblies and seditious and tumultuous meetings, be put in execution, there will not want means to preserve the public peace against attempts of this sort of people." Clearly, I mean, they're referred to, I mean, in a sense, there's a bit of fake news going on here, because firstly, they weren't levellers, but of course the levellers at a national level, the political levellers had been defeated by this time. So to label the diggers as levellers was actually quite a term of abuse. And that's the reason why the diggers themselves refer to themselves as the new levellers. They weren't the levellers that people have referred to. And it's also the case that's wrong about this is that, of course, as the Digger Declaration explains, even those people, many people who had an interest in the common land actually signed over their interest to the Wellingborough diggers to allow them to occupy the common land with their consent. There was no riotous assemblies, seditious or tumultuous meetings, but nevertheless, the Justice of the Peace was given the powers by this order by the Council of State to end the digger colony. And within a few weeks, the enterprise was brought to an end by the forces of law and order under the orders of Mr. Pentlow. The digger leaders were arrested, taken to Northampton and charged with riot and affray. And that's from the records. After this, we know nothing. We don't know what happened to them. Although it has been speculated that some might have subsequently gone to the United States, because at this time, any dissidents and people who were unpopular or perceived as unpopular, religiously or otherwise, often this was the time of the start of the move towards migration towards the United States by groups that were being oppressed. I mean, it's also likely that some of the leaders of the Wellingborough diggers subsequently became Quakers, and of course there's a strong Quaker tradition, non-conformist and Quaker tradition in Northamptonshire that goes back right to this time. There's the Quaker meeting house in Wellingborough, there's the Quaker meeting house in Findon. I think there's a strong Quaker tradition in Great Doddington, as far as I'm aware, but I'll stand corrected. But certainly around the county, non-conformism is very, very strong. And the Wellingborough diggers probably would have been part of that movement. But in the United States, there is a town called Wellingborough. And we don't know whether this might be linked to where, and indeed, Wellingborough Council has received visitors from Wellingborough in the US, and there is a kind of plaque given by the people from Wellingborough to the people of Wellingborough, which is in the council near the council chamber at Wellingborough Council. So there might very well be a link between the diggers, the Wellingborough diggers, and Wellingborough in the US. But was it the end? Actually, this short movement of the diggers in the early part of 1649 in St George's Hill, and there were other digger colonies as well around the country. There was one in Bedfordshire, and there's evidence that there was others in Surrey as well. So the movement had actually spread. The St George's Hill digger colony sent out emissaries to try and promote the idea of digging. But far more importantly, the diggers are remembered right up to the present day, but through song. And there's just one or two things here that I've put up. One is for those of you who don't know, there's the obelisk in Moscow, which features Gerard Winstanley as one of the founders of socialism. I'm not sure whether Gerard Winstanley would welcome that label, but I doubt he would object too much. But who knows? But certainly people claim Winstanley as a founder of movements which we might now describe as socialist. The centre one, Diggers and Dreamers, a guide to communal living in Britain. Interesting, the diggers are often referred to in the context of debating issues around the land and the idea of living in common, of having communes and what have you. There was for a short while, there was a digger movement in San Francisco during the hippie period, and they described themselves as diggers. On your left, on the bottom, is an annual festival which is held in Wigan, the Wigan Digger Festival, in commemoration of Gerard Winstanley and the digger movement, and that's an annual event which is held in Wigan. The top right hand corner, with the people gathered around a plaque. That plaque is near where the Wellingborough diggers would have had their commune, and it's because now next door to the area that we know as Bearshanks, there's now Prologis Park, a new distribution warehouse centres. I'm not sure that Gerard Winstanley would have approved of the Prologis Park and all those warehouses dotted over the countryside. In fact, I think he would have been out there campaigning against them probably. But nevertheless, Prologis, the people who own Prologis site, agreed at the request of a number of people from Wellingborough to put up a monument, a little memorial to the Wellingborough diggers just at the side of Prologis Park. So you could go along and see it, and it's quite a nice little memorial to the Wellingborough diggers, and that's the group of people, which included myself, who took the photograph, who campaigned for some kind of memorial to the Wellingborough diggers. And the above the banner is a banner which is featured on many demonstrations in Wellingborough over the years, and particularly has been welcome. There's an annual Levellers Festival at Burford in Oxfordshire, which I've been to on many occasions, and this banner is always welcome because the Levellers and the diggers, of course, as I've referred to, there's a little bit of competition between them, but the Wellingborough diggers go along to support the Levellers Day in Burford in Oxfordshire. So, I mean, the other thing before I go on to the further reading and things is that the ideas of the Wellingborough diggers and Gerard Winstanley may be, at one level, a minor footnote in history, but their influence can be traced in the writings of Thomas Paine, Robert Owen, Karl Marx, and many other radical socialist writers. Winstanley's writings are regularly referred to in the context of a variety of campaigns. I understand that Philip Pullman's His Dark Matters trilogy is strongly influenced by Winstanley's writings, including the idea of the Republic of Heaven. Now, I'm not familiar myself with Pullman, and I find His Dark Matters particularly weird. I'm not really into it. But the writings of Winstanley, the ideas that influenced the Wellingborough diggers and others, reverberates to the present day. And certainly his ideas inform discussions about the ownership of land reform. The fact, for example, that land ownership is so heavily concentrated now into a few hands, and that what we might call those areas of common land or common areas that we can freely go to is actually very, very restricted. I discovered only relatively recently that the Swansgate Centre, which of course replaced the Swansgate Centre in Wellingborough, which replaced a series of roads which people could freely walk down without let or hindrance. The Swansgate Centre itself, you can't walk to it without let or hindrance. It's private property, and theoretically, at least, you have no rights to walk and go into the Swansgate. So whole swathes of Britain are now areas which are not free for people to go to. And it also informs, the ideas inform discussions around the role of public services, which are often sometimes referred to as the commons. They belong to the public. And the classic example of that is the National Health Service, which is seen as a public asset, free for all at the point of need, and obviously a valuable asset, which I think we all welcome and revere at this moment in time. So the idea of common ownership and services can be fed back right to the period of the digger movement. And the further readings there, there's some books and I've referred to the film, and look out for the Wellingborough Digger Festival. We have an annual festival. We've had one for several years. Last year it had to go online. We had to do it as a Zoom event, which wasn't quite as successful, but it was nevertheless good fun. And I think that we'll be holding one probably in July this coming year. And finally, I'd like to say that this presentation is not an original piece of work. I've had to do a lot of pulling together, but most of the information is lifted from the writings of others, too numerous to mention. So that's it, folks. Is it the end? I don't know. I think that the ideas of the Wellingborough diggers and the diggers of St George's Hill and the writings of Gerald Winstanley are gifts that we give to humanity for the future, frankly, because I think they will not disappear. And Wellingborough, I'm proud to say, is at the centre of that. But most Wellingbourians probably know little or nothing about the Wellingborough diggers, although they did feature in the March of Time event, which was held by Wellingborough Council to mark the millennium. There was a little scene in the March of Time featuring the Wellingborough diggers, and there is references in the Wellingborough Heritage Centre as well. But thank you very much. That's the end of the presentation. I hope I didn't go on too long. I was hoping to finish about. There's actually just one more bit of music which I'd like to play you, if I may, and I need to go back, I think, to find it.
In 1649, to St George's Hill, a ragged band they called the Diggers came to show the people's will. They defied the landlords, they defied the laws. They were the dispossessed, reclaiming what was theirs. We come in peace, they said, to dig and sow. We come to work the lands in common and to make the waste grounds grow. This earth divided we will make whole, so it will be a common treasury for all. the sin of property we do disdain. No man has any right to buy and sell the earth for private gain. By theft and murder they took the land. Now everywhere the walls spring up at their command. They make the laws to chain us well. The clergy dazzle us with heaven, or they damn us into hell. We will not worship the God they serve, the God of greed who feeds the rich while poor folks starve. We work, we eat together, we need no swords. We will not bow to the masters or pay rent to the lords till we are free, though we are poor. You diggers all, stand up for glory, stand up now. From the men of property the orders came. They sent the hired men and troopers to wipe out the diggers' claim, tear down their cottages, destroy their corn. They were dispersed, but still the vision lingers on. You poor take courage, you rich take care. This earth was made a common treasury for everyone to share. All things in common, all people one. We come in peace, the orders came to cut them down. We come in peace, the orders came to cut them down.
There you are. Can you hear me? Are we still on mute? Everybody's muted still, I think.
Well done, Paul.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Paul. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear fine.
Yeah,
Yeah.
good. Thank you very much. That was fascinating and some rather nice musical interludes as well. Does anybody have any questions? If you do, can you put your hands up and we'll try and get to you. I told you do well, Paul.
Yeah, no questions at all.
Oh, there's one. There's one, Mr. Robert.
I've always got something to say.
The Cavaliers have to get in.
Despite having been involved in allotments for quite some time in my career, I've never really understood where they come from. Do you think, Paul, they have any origins back to this diggers movement? Is allotment movement something that came out of that? Or am I just fooling myself?
I don't know, Robert, but it wouldn't surprise me. It's funny how these ideas pop up. I honestly don't know.
Yeah, because I mean, I suppose technically,
I think
people had their allotments when they had all those sort of things that then disappeared with enclosure. So I just wonder whether the diggers movement inspired it to come later.
Well, the allotments came in the 19th century, really, didn't they? When really working people didn't have gardens. They people had moved into towns with into terraced housing where there was no. So the origins of the allotment movement were essentially people who didn't have land, or so it would have been inspired by. But I think it's much more likely to have been inspired by the William Morris and the Green, the new town movement, the Green, Welling Garden City, the idea that working people should have places where they could go.
Yeah, can I say? I think we touched on it. This is, I think it's from enclosure days that land was allotted. I think that's where the term comes from, and people were allotted small bits of land, and I think then you're probably right that in the 19th century, that I think allotments were the result of an act of Parliament for land to be given to or available to people to rent and grow in a little bit as they moved into the towns and wanted a bit of land to grow their own, which they didn't have or was taken away from them perhaps when they lived in the country. During the enclosure movement times.
Even these days, when we were living in Dover and bought a house there, we couldn't get the deeds absolute for a period of time. I think it was 10 and then extended to 12 years because the land had no known owners, but there was time for these owners to come forward and claim it. But in the meantime, it had been claimed by someone else who built a house on it. And eventually we got the deeds after 12 years. We could get them, but so there must have been. There still is in law today, I would imagine, the fact that if people see a piece of derelict land and work it and they take a chance, but if no one else claims it within 12 years, then it becomes theirs.
I'm not that we've got two property land experts with us who probably know the law on this. I think that might have changed recently. Has it, Robert or Bob?
Can't hear you, Paul. No.
Has the law changed?
You can't hear me.
I'm only joking.
No.
Yeah, you actually got another one. Good, Richard, who was on here somewhere. He's also a
expert.
Richard Blackley.
Yeah, whether the laws changed. I mean, this was up in the 1970s, of course, when we were in Dover. But we had the problem and the associated problems with mortgage and all the rest of it because the land technically wasn't ours.
Yeah.
But we took a chance.
Adverse possession, isn't it? It's called?
Yes, yes.
It has changed slightly because if it is, you could possess it and then claim ownership. It has changed in recent years because if it is a registered title that you're claiming against, the land registry will write to the registered owner and say, you dispute this. So it has become slightly more difficult if the land is registered.
Yeah.
If it's not registered, then you're right. You squat on it and exclude all other people.
Yeah, I think yes.
In Wellingborough down Midland Road, where the developer built that estate there, them houses, and then disappeared, just evaporated. Built public.
He's back.
What's
that, John?
That might be my television giving feedback.
You had a question from Dinah, I think.
Now, can I just say there was
a question, more of an observance.
Sorry, Robert.
It wasn't a question, more of an observance. In that Letchworth Garden City was founded on the idea that everybody had enough garden to grow their own fresh vegetables and get plenty of fresh air.
Yes.
Well, it's a bit like
that was one of the premises behind the movement that started that.
Yes.
And that's like the Bourneville village as well, and the Lever brothers are up in Liverpool as well.
Oh yes.
That's a Quaker.
It's also interesting. I've never heard of the diggers. Yeah.
There's some feedback somewhere.
Focus.
gives them to Bob Entwistle.
Is it Bob Entwistle? It sort of seems to be.
Because you've got two things open for Bob Entwistle.
I think if everybody mutes.
I've just muted Bob and that seems to have fixed it.
Right.
Okay, away you go. So we're all right now, I think.
Has Bob gone?
Okay.
No, he's just muted, that's all.
The other thing I was going to observe was I'd never heard of the diggers, not the Wellingborough diggers. I'd heard of the levellers, but anyway, it struck me that what they did is still going on today, because a lot of places in cities and towns have been turned into communal gardens where there were bits of waste ground. Folks have started using them as communal gardens. Yeah. And that's a similar thing. They're just run by volunteers.
That's right. And indeed, many of these movements actually will reference the diggers as part of a historical tradition of which they are now a part. This is why I meant that the traditions of Winstanley and the diggers just kind of rolls on wherever people feel that either their land is being dispossessed and taken away from them. I mean, or people need some, they see derelict land around them or land which is not being used properly. They want to take it over. So these notions of the land is a common treasury for all. This is that's from Gerard Winstanley, and the biblical references I find incredibly moving and powerful, particularly as we have less and less control over land. I mean, Bob may have something to say about it, and Robert, but I think it's difficult for us to believe the extent to which land ownership has shifted in recent years. I mean, I'm sure this is an issue, and I don't want to open up a Pandora's box, but one of the issues which is really quite controversial is travellers and gypsies. At one time, gypsies and travellers travelled around the country and stayed on common land very often, land which was either not owned by anybody or was free for people. Now it's impossible, absolutely impossible now for gypsies and travellers to follow a traditional way of life where they can move around the country and stay. And now that doesn't mean that some travellers and gypsies are not bloody awful, frankly, but there's a lot that aren't, and they just want to follow a traditional lifestyle, which means they move around. But they can't stay anywhere, and they certainly can't stay anywhere legally. I mean, all the bunding around Northampton, there's whole swathes of areas where traditionally gypsies and travellers would have been able to have just pulled up for a night. It's all bunded now, so they can't, or it's fenced off. So even public land. So, and what's happened as land becomes more and more enclosed and prevents them going, they go to places which are less and less convenient for people for them to stay there, really. And I've been involved in gypsy traveller issues for 40 years in around this area, and I find it just heart-rendering that it's an issue that's caused by this lack of places where people could stay, and the extent to which you find land being owned and who owns it is incredible. Anyway, that's me ranting again. I'm a rant. I'm going to turn into a ranter. And of course, that's where the word ranting comes from. Of course.
Yeah, ranting.
Get your clothes on if you do, please.
Yeah, I will do. You don't know what I've got below here, do you?
Oh, no.
Oh dear. Are there any more questions at all? Paul, there's one thing on the presentation. Like a lot of places, the spelling of Wellingborough seems to have changed. You had in the 1600s, it seemed to be spelled with a double O at the end, and then on the flag there was no G and an OW on the end. Is that what is the sort of the proper way? I suppose they'll say now, but I suppose
I don't, as you say, I don't think there is. I think I've seen a million and different, well, not a million, that's a bit of an exaggeration, but several different spellings of Findon. You know, the names of places changes, I think, century by century.
You can
I
see
don't
how
know,
many.
has Cogenhoe always been, it may have been pronounced differently in the past,
No,
was it? Or
in
it
the
was
old
spelled-
days, it
spelled
was spelled
differently.
Cooknoe or No.
Yeah.
In
W.
Cooknoe, Cogenhoe. It's been
Yeah.
all sorts of things.
Yeah, and I think Wellingborough's the same, and there's Wellingborough in the United States. I think that must be Wellingborough. Whether they deliberately changed it or that was the spelling that they took with them, I don't know. But I think there must be a link there, because I don't know of any other Wellingboroughs around.
Well, it wasn't until the dictionaries were started that
The
spelling
spelling.
became standardized anyway.
Mm.
So people just simply wrote down what they thought the sound was.
Yes.
And that's why you've got so many different spellings.
Mm. So that's
Oh, well, we live and learn. Anyway, are there anything else anybody would like to say? That's all.
John Grove.
Otherwise, sorry,
Just interesting with
Don't go.
nothing else.
the songs you played was Roy Bailey, wasn't it?
Sorry.
A lot of the songs you played it was Roy Bailey.
Well, Roy Bailey sings a lot of them, but they were Leon Rosselson.
I know. I've got one of his books.
Yeah. Did you like the music, by the way? I was a bit. I was
Yeah,
wondering.
yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
The music was good.
I like
it
folk
breaks it up a little bit, and
It
then
adds to it.
and it's really I love the Ibiza Kopf and the Ranter song, and that's one of my favourite songs because it makes me. I feel like I should be a ranter.
But actually, the songs are not dissimilar. The music and the tone not dissimilar to sea shanties, are they?
That's right.
Yeah, The Fisherman's Friend.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, those songs. I mean, certainly the World Turned Upside Down has been played by hundreds of different groups. You know, Billy Bragg, Leon Rosselson. There's the Chuwamba.
Oh yes, yeah.
They've done a version. They've done a version of it. It's a very, very popular song for people to rewrite and rearrange. And I think the only song that I think I've been told it's an original song from the period is the Stand Up Now. But there's no way of verifying that, of course. But it does.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you very much for having me.
Once again,
and if Great Doddington would like a presentation, I'd be very happy to do a presentation for Great Doddington as well. My fees are very reasonable.
Okay, we bear that in mind.
Anyway, Paul, thanks very much once again, and I think everybody just one more round of applause. Thank you.
Thank
you. Before we go, we've got another Zoom presentation on Wednesday, February the 10th, which we're trying to get back to the second Wednesday of the month. And Douglas Goddard is going to talk to us about medieval churches in Northamptonshire, which I believe the journey starts and finishes at Whiston. So that will be quite interesting. For various reasons, we will not be able to sort of go along with the last 3 months of last year's programme. And although Anne's got a rough programme mapped out for next year, or the next after the 1st of April, it is clear that several of the speakers don't want to do Zoom presentations. So what we're probably going to do is not put out a published itinerary for next year, for the 2021-22. We'll take it as far ahead as we can, because as we move into the year, we'll be coming against more speakers who may or may not wish to do a Zoom presentation, in which case we've got to find somebody else. And of course, living optimistically, there's always the hope, if things go well, we may be able to get into the village hall at the back end of this year. Who knows? I can't see it in the near future, but possibly November, December, who knows? In which case we can revert back to the programme that Anne has planned for us. So please keep a listen out, and Terry will send out with the Our Heritage Matters the next month's speaker, and obviously the website will be kept up to date on what we're doing. But thank you all for signing on, and we look forward to seeing you on February the 10th.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is all.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. Bye, Peter from Donington. Wherever he is.
Thank you, Paul.
Bye. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks.